Just to let you know, Chair, that we're now streaming live as well.
Right, I'll start in that case. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Keith Harvey, Vice Chair of the Schools Forum, and I'll be chairing the meeting today as Graham Spellman's given his apologies. So welcome everyone to today's meeting. I'm assisted by Jessica Bayliss as clerk and Sadie Owen, who's going to be acting as Zoom host of the meeting. The other members of the forum are Maria Morgan, Paul Davey, Joe Lagares, Chris Prosser, Catherine Burney, who's standing in for John Hewitt, Jackie Davies, Trevor Keeble, Gemma Piper, David Ramsden, Leslie Roberts, Campbell Smith, Arndt Sizer, Edwin Towell, who's going to be standing in for Charlotte Wilson, and Lindsay Wood. And non-school members are Reverend Mark Bennett and Richard Hand. The following councillors and officers from West Berkshire Council are in attendance to advise the meeting. So we've got Councillor Heather Codling, Portfolio Holder for Children, Education and Young People's Services. Councillor Ian Cottingham, Portfolio Holder for Finance and Corporate Services. Anne-Marie Dodds, Executive Director for People, Children and Family Services. Michelle Sancho, the Acting Head of Education Services. Melanie Ellis, the Head of Finance. Lisa Potts, Finance Manager. Jane Seymour, who's the Service Manager for SEN, Inclusion and Disabled Children. Nicola Ponton, who's Acting Service Manager for SEMH. Avril Allenby, Service Manager for Early Years. And Rose Carberry, Principal Advisor for School Improvement. Before we start, I'd like to explain tonight's meetings being live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow the proceedings. So if we start with item 1, apologies. Jess, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair. So I've had apologies from Graham Spellman, Phil Spray, Richard Hawthorne, Melissa Cliff, Michelle Harrison, Charlotte Wilson, with Edwin Towell attending as her substitute. Also apologies from John Hewitt, with Catherine Burney attending as his substitute, and also Maria Morgan is going to be attending slightly late this evening. Just one thing to note, when we get to the maintained primary members' votes, not until the de-delegations, but I just need one more primary member to join for us to be quorum, because I believe I've only got 2 at the moment, which is Keith, yourself, and Paul Davey. So we'll reassess that when we get there.
So if we move on to item 2, the minutes. So question, are the members of the forum willing to accept the minutes of the previous meeting as an accurate record of the meeting? So as chair, I propose to accept the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of October. Does that find a seconder? Charlotte, thank you. I'll now put that to the vote and ask for a show of hands.
I can confirm those minutes are approved.
Thank you. Okay. So if we move on to item 3, actions from the previous meeting. So there are 3 actions on that. Melanie, I think the first 2 had your name on.
Yes, they did. I think the answers are included fully in there, but the first one was actually a question from yourself, Keith, about whether the 1.9 increase was including the grant, but it's on top of. That's confirmed there. And the second one was some wording from Jane in answer to that question.
Thank you. And the third action was about whether the forum should meet in person, and basically we need to make a decision as to whether we would like to have an in-person meeting either on the 22nd of January or the 11th of March 2024. I just wonder if any members have any preference as to which meeting they might like to have in person. David.
Hi Keith, is one of them any more important than the other in terms of agenda items and financial year?
I'm not sure. Melanie or Michelle may be able to answer that, possibly.
I think, sorry, there's somebody else talking.
Sorry, it's probably children at my school.
I mean, I think usually it's the February meeting that's key in terms of financial arrangements, the one just before the end of the financial year. I don't know if that changes people wanting to be in person or not.
I mean, I'm not sure, and I have no strong preference really, I have to say. Can I suggest maybe we make the nearest one to that one you're talking about, Michelle, the February meeting, the in-person one perhaps make the most sense. Gemma, sorry.
Is there a requirement to have it in person? I know we said we'd come back to this to consider next time, but maybe the question would be, do we continue all online?
Yeah, thank you. Trevor.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we actually do meet in person, actually understand how you work, and it would be more inclusive if we met in person at least once, so we just understand where everybody sits and actually have a bit of a social as well to understand where we're all coming from.
Thank you. I mean, I think it does make sense to have at least one meeting in person. Perhaps, I mean, I don't know when the next the meetings are. We have one in January and one in March, is that correct? So maybe if we said the March one, because I guess that's the nearest to the end of the financial year, perhaps would be in person.
Apologies, I said February. I meant, yeah, March.
Okay, great, thank you. So we'll move on to, in that case, to item 4, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest for the meeting? No. Okay, so item 5, membership. Jess, over to you for that.
Thank you. So yeah, we still have a couple of vacancies on the forum, including the early years PVI provider and the non-school post-16 representative, which we are hoping both positions will be filled soon. There's also an academy governor rep vacancy, and an election will be run for this in the new year. But otherwise, there's no other forum members coming near to the end of their term of office.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to our first sort of substantive item, item 6. The school's funding formula consultation. I'll hand over to you, Melanie, at this point.
Thank you. So yes, this paper is setting out the results of the consultation that was held in October and November. I'll go through it question by question, and then there's a succession of votes at the end which need to be taken. Where applicable, the Heads Funding Group has made a recommendation at the end of each suggestion. And some of the items, as you will see, are sort of 100% in favour of, so I'll just sort of whiz past those ones. So the first one was just about mirroring the national funding formula, which was a resounding yes, we want to do that. Question 2 is about applying the sparsity factor, and this was voted for. 17 wanted to apply the minimum factor and 7 wanted to apply the full factor. However, when we discussed this at Heads Funding Group, the group wanted this to have a full discussion at the forum because we only had 24 responses to the consultation out of 70 or so schools. So they wanted to make sure that there was a full discussion that perhaps brought in other areas or thoughts that hadn't been covered before. So can I ask if anyone's got anything they want to say on sparsity, please?
We'll go to Trevor.
Yeah, can you just explain in layman's terms exactly what that means and what the consequences for the schools would be, please?
Okay, so the national funding formula gives a set amount for a sparse school, and it's to do with the distance to the next school. Traditionally, though, or for the last few years, this group has, instead of following the funding formula for that, has gone for the minimum sparsity factor. So that means that a sparse school would get a lower amount of funding, which then therefore means that all the other schools would get the rest of it because the size of the pot is the same.
We'll move to Leslie.
funding obviously is there to support those schools. So I think those schools should have it. I have a conflict of interest because we benefit, but obviously we need it, because if your plan is set at a set amount, you still have to have a whole teacher. You can't ask for half of that teacher. You can't get rid of it. So I think with funding getting tighter and tighter, the schools that it's designed for do need it to be in place, because also as the crow flies and all the rest of it, Goring, which is an Oxfordshire school, would be my closest. So under the DFE rules, West Berkshire never used to have to help us. And then when the consultation came out, it came in because you can't physically walk to Basildon safely on the roads. And that is our closest West Berkshire school. And the process is very different through Oxfordshire. So I just want to obviously say I have a conflict of interest, but I know firsthand that we absolutely do need funding, which is designed to support us with.
Thank you, Leslie. Gemma, over to you.
Yeah, when we discussed this at Heads funding, I posed a question around how many had responded that were from a small school. I think we just have to acknowledge that certainly those within small settings, even just responding to these kind of consultations is really tricksy, actually. So whether we're, if that was a true representation of the number of small schools versus the number of large schools, does that actually work out to be a bit more of a equal balance on whether or not that funding is so critical? We know it's critical to those small schools. If it's not there, I think we asked the question last time about if it's not there, what would the negative impact be? I remember discussing this previously. It was rather large. So I think I'm mindful of the fact that 7 versus 17 is a clear split, isn't it? However, whether or not the small schools are truly represented adequately in that, in terms of the impact, I think it's quite a difficult measure. I'd be in full support of full funding here for sparsity.
Okay. Thank you, Gemma. Mark.
Yeah, so I mean, as a Dialson representative, I obviously represent quite a number of small schools, and if we were going to make a change that had a negative impact on those schools, I think we'd probably need rather more strategic background on how we were going to deal with the impacts that would arise. I'm not sure we quite got to the bottom of what effect it would have to change.
Thank you. Although, can I just clarify, Melanie, it wouldn't have a negative impact. It would be that if we went for the sparsity factor, it would have a positive impact, rather than if we didn't, it would have a negative. Does that make sense?
Yes, if we apply the factor in full, then the sparse schools will benefit.
But the issue is that some of our schools would cease to qualify as sparse schools. Is it? Am I right in that?
No, they would all qualify. That would just be a lower amount that they would receive.
Because in the past we've used a different sparsity definition.
No, we'd be using the same. It's the same allocation, but we would just be applying a lower value in total allocated to sparsity. So everyone would just receive a bit less.
So sorry. Thank you for clarifying that. My brain has obviously got addled, but
I think you're right. There was some discussion about different ways of applying it before, a couple of years ago.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. My question was about the split between schools who would benefit from the sparsity and schools who would not benefit from the sparsity fund across the whole of the 70 odd schools that are in the West Berkshire area. You said 17 and 7 responded, but I haven't got a sense of what proportion of our schools would actually be counted as benefiting from the full impact of a sparsity distribution. I.e., how many schools have got? How many schools are in smaller areas with higher levels of sparsity? I'm trying to get my head around it the right way.
Yeah, I think from memory it's about 10 or 12, but I'll open up the actual paper while we're here, and then I can come back to you with the answer.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That would be helpful.
Great, thank you. I think, should we bring that to a vote in a few minutes' time? We'll go through the other ones first, Melanie, if that's okay.
Yeah, now of course I'm attempting to multitask, which is never going to be good. Right, okay, so where are we then? Question 3. Yeah, that was just about how to adjust the funding by using the ARPU, which was a pretty much full support. So then question 4, this is another one for the discussion. So this is about the block transfer. And as you can see, it's 22 versus 2 on 0% or 0.25%. But I believe that Chris here, was going to read something out. Jess, can you confirm that? David? Not David.
Yeah, Chris Prosser, I believe.
Yeah.
Do you have something to add on that?
Yeah, this is from a couple of heads actually, but I'll read the response from Richard Hawthorne. So it's linked to the disapplication request that's been made. He says he has 2 issues with the decision, which I agree with as well, just for the record. Firstly, this was not discussed during the recent Heads Funding Group meeting on the 21st of November. And secondly, the proposal from West Berkshire flies in the face of a very clear outcome from the consultation, which saw the vast majority of the 22 schools recommending that 0% was transferred. Given that the disapplication was made by the DFE deadline of the 17th of November, he goes on to say he finds it incredible it wasn't mentioned at the Heads Funding Group from West Berkshire. And there obviously then there was no discussion around that disapplication in the Heads Funding Group as well. Furthermore, is the only item from the consultation where there seems to be a deviation from the recommendations of consultation. Surely knowing this would have alerted officers to the potential controversial nature of the disapplication and therefore warranted further discussion at Heads Funding Group. I think in conclusion to that, obviously we would have liked to have had a discussion and heard the rationale as to why the disapplication was being made at that point, rather than learning about it in the paperwork that came out for tonight's meeting.
Okay, thank you. Melanie, do you have anything to add on that before I go to David?
Yes, I do. So I did see the email earlier, and so in response to that, it was discussed at the Heads Funding Group meeting on the 21st of November. It was under the agenda item for consultation results, so the same paper as this one. And it was also mentioned in the October Heads Funding Group meeting when I said that it was something that the local authority was considering, but at that point there hadn't been a decision made. In the November meeting, I made Heads Funding Group aware that the disapplication had been made by the local authority and that it had to be made before tonight's meeting because that's the deadline for set by the DFE, which was the 17th of November. I told the group that the DFE would be requiring further information before they could make a decision, and that information they would require was in particular the minutes of tonight's discussion on it. And they've confirmed that yes, they will require those minutes. And I then said that I would include details of the reason for the disapplication within the Schools Forum version of the Heads Funding Group paper, which is in there this evening on page 15 of the pack. I think at that meeting, Keith asked for some confirmation about the Schools Forum minutes and that they would go to the DFE. I haven't yet seen the minutes to confirm that, but Jess did verbally confirm to me that that was an accurate description of the meeting. So the discussion did take place. It wasn't a full discussion, but it was there and it was mentioned, and anyone could have discussed it if they wanted to at that point.
Thank you, Melanie. David, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. So I think Chris summarised our views, several people's views. I take what Melanie's just said. Unfortunately, I wasn't at that Heads Funding Group meeting, but procedurally, I understand what Melanie is saying. I think the issues are around credibility of the consultation saying 0% and then us doing something else. I think that's a huge issue. I'd be really interested who decided to do that, and what the logic is, because I think my final point is, while we've got this Delivering Better Value programme going on, which I understand, and Anne-Marie I know understands, is not going to be a miracle cure to anything, but while that's going on and while we're waiting for the advice from that project as to how we're going to reduce a significant deficit over time, I just, excuse me, my lights are going off, that's going to frighten people. I just wouldn't transfer anything while all of that is happening. That would be my view. I think there's a huge credibility issue with head teachers saying 0%, and then not just head teachers, and then another decision being made.
Thank you, David, for your views. Anne-Marie.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks, David. So there's a couple of issues here, and I think we have got we've got largely a sequencing issue here, notwithstanding the difficult issues that we've got to face financially. So the sequencing issue is that the DFE's timescales don't fit with our timescales in terms of Schools Forum. So ordinarily what one would have wanted to do is to be able to have a conversation at the Heads Funding Group and then a detailed conversation in here in Schools Forum, and then make a decision about the disapplication request to Schools Forum. The sequencing, and I've raised this in my previous authority with the DFE, the sequencing of what the DFE require and the sequence of School Forum meetings don't align. So first of all, the local authority, so the decision ultimately, and you're saying who is responsible for the decision ultimately is for myself and Joseph Holmes as the finance director from the council to put in this disapplication request. What that essentially does is put a marker in the sand with the DFE. It doesn't prejudge and it doesn't preempt any decision that the Schools Forum take, but we can't put a marker in the sand post the Schools Forum meeting. So in a very simplistic sense, there's a marker put in the sand from the council to the DFE to say we might want to have a conversation in further detail about this disapplication request. Being really clear, the DFE take into consideration this discussion, which Melanie's quite rightly said, they will be asking for previous minutes, which they have, and they will also be asking for the detail note of the meeting today. So subsequently they'll want the minutes, but actually what they do want is they want the detail of this conversation that we're having tonight, tomorrow, which we will need to submit to them. So this will be taken into consideration. So this is not about the council trying to do something that's not legitimate and haven't been consulted, discussed with the heads, but it's a timing and a sequencing issue. The point that David makes about delivering better value, I think, is really essential. And having met the heads last week, it feels like a long time ago, but it was just last week, having met with the secondary heads, particularly last week, it was really clear to me in there, and I don't know the reasons why, and I don't need a post-mortem on the reasons why at this stage, that the consequences to the council of the Delivering Better Value programme are quite significant and probably weren't as well understood as they might be. Now, these issues are interrelated, and if you bear with me, I can explain why. Delivering Better Value is not a pump priming programme. Delivering Better Value is a transformation programme, and that transformation has to deliver a U-turn in our spending on SEND. And it has to bring into balance our high needs block spending so that we can balance the high needs block. Now, the consequences of us not doing that is at the end of the financial year 25-26, the statutory override that's currently in place, which essentially means that we can spend and we can overspend on the dedicated schools grant without consequence to the council. That statutory override doesn't exist at present from the end of 25-26. That will mean that any overspend that is sat on the DSG, whether it be in the high needs block or any other block, come March 26, will have to be covered by the budget of the council. So the corporate reserve of West Berkshire Council would need to be great enough to cover the overspend on the dedicated schools grant on the 31st of March 2026. I can tell you at present, and Councillor Cottingham's on the call, may be able to give me figures or you figures. I can tell you at present, the current situation and the projected spend even till the end of March 24, so the current financial year, that deficit on the dedicated schools grant is greater than the revenue reserve of the council, and therefore, without any additional spending over the next year, 2 years, the council would be bankrupt. The consequences of bankruptcy to the council mean that we would have commissioners step in to run the council. And the consequences of commissioners running the finances and the rest of the council, potentially, is that we would not have any authority in any decision making. The decision making would be taken out of our hands, and it would be a commissioner that was making decisions around children's services and how we were spending the money. So I'm not meaning to be extremist about this, it's just the reality. We are in a position with our dedicated schools grant, like many other authorities, and I understand that, where to fail to address the deficit position at present could in 2026 mean that the council is bankrupt. That is likely to mean any services that are non-statutory may not be delivered. You've all seen the notices. You're sure I'm seeing Northamptonshire County Council, Nottingham City Council, and many others are getting into a state where they can't make their own financial decisions about how they run the council. Now, delivering better value is our one opportunity, as David said, to look at how we're spending our money on the dedicated schools grant. That's £1 million. That's not £1 million to plug the gap, because the gap is circa 9 million. So that's not going to do that. But that £1 million is transform. But through that period of transformation, within 3 years, we also need to bring into balance the dedicated schools grant. Failure to do that is the likely bankruptcy of the council because of the reserve that's available in the council to cover this deficit. The council are currently in a position where they are talking about services that they will stop and services that they will do less of. Every directorate across the council is in the process of finalising savings to go through a budget board, the next one of which will be this week, so that the council can set a balanced budget. If we were taking in this overspend on the dedicated schools grant today, the council would not be able to set a balanced budget. So in 2 years' time, unless we address this now, we will not be able to set a balanced budget as a council. Part of the question that we are asked with the dedicated schools grant is, where have we made movements in block transfer? So there is an expectation on the council that they will articulate. Now, I don't know what the judgment will be for the DFE, but I'm just saying what we will be asked for. What they will ask us is the conversations and the negotiation that we've had about block transfer. So we can, as a council, legitimately, whether you think it's morally right or wrong, that's a different conversation. We can legitimately request a 0.5% transfer from the schools block into the high needs block. Given that we are in a delivering better value programme, there's almost an expectation that we will have had that conversation and we will have taken that measure. I think that measure right across the board is just over 600,000, and that's 600,000 off a 9 million deficit. So it's minimal, but it is significant in terms of signalling our intent to take measures to address the overspend position. The delivering better value submission is to go into the DFE by the 14th. So we've got 10 more days to put that submission in. But be really clear, as I am, that we have got to recover a multi-million-pound deficit over the next 2 years in that high needs block to be able to bring our dedicated schools grant into balance. I'm not sure whether I've helped or hindered in that conversation, but I'm happy to answer any questions. But I didn't want colleagues to think that we were trying to do something in a covert way or an underhand way, but we were merely meeting the timelines of the DFE to enable us to be able to have that conversation further down that line, because to fail to ask for it would have meant we couldn't have it considered.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. I'm going to just skip over Gemma and David just for a second and go to Councillor Cottingham, because I think that may be helpful, and then we'll come back to Gemma.
Thank you very much, everyone. Yes, I can reiterate which Anne-Marie has just stated. I think it's no secret that we're facing severe financial deficit this year, but also for next year. So currently at the end of Q2, we have a deficit of 3.3 million against general reserves of 7.2 million. So that gives us roughly 3.9 million headroom. Obviously, we want to make sure we're not utilising our reserves in any way this year. And for next financial year, we're already having to find 14 million of savings, of which no doubt you've seen on our website, also in the press, the fact that we have £2 million worth of savings out to consultation, as well as other ideas of reducing services. I don't like to use the word cuts. What we're looking to do is have more efficiency as a council. However, we still have a further 2 million to find. So we are facing significant financial hardship, and that's been sort of triggered in two ways. Firstly, adult social services, and also then children's family services. So we're seeing more children coming into our system, needing care packages, and the costs of servicing those children, it's increased significantly with inflation. So as I say, make no bounds about the fact that we are facing significant financial deficit, and without this 0.5% transfer, as Anne-Marie says, we will effectively be facing bankruptcy in 2026, and then we lose control of all of the services. We then have commissioners coming in who will make cuts, and without any sort of feeling of what the residents of West Berkshire need and want. So, as again, I totally endorse what Anne-Marie just said earlier.
Thank you. I'll come to Gemma next.
Thank you. I understand the sequencing issue, and I think it's really helpful to have that explained. So thank you, Anne-Marie. I think that we're facing a situation here where we've got a legacy of information around how money has been spent. Even if you look at the spend to save proposals, there isn't that granular detail about how much is being saved with the evidence that's already provided. So I think there's been a real lack of clarity, I would say, over time, not on what it's sometimes going to be spent on, but on what it's going to save. And I think that is something that we've missed before those consultations go out as part of that package. And that has led to votes of schools and trusts not wanting to see that money transferred for no clear reason. I think I feel frustrated over time in that we've known about this financial problem, and there are a whole bunch of levers that can and will be pulled now with the reality of deficit that we face in due course. But this is just one of the many levers the non-statutory services, absolutely, and also those spend to save packages, all of those things that haven't got a direct financial savings allocated to that spend. We have to consider all of those things in the round, so we can go through them one at a time, because that is the nature of our meeting and this type of work. But I think we've got to consider this is not the only lever, and I can see why there is a very clear mandate from heads and trust leaders to not allow any transfer or request no transfer. I get that that's out of our hands in terms of the disapplication process, and I understand why that is as well. But this is a problem that isn't going to be solved by that one action.
Thank you. David, come to you next.
Actually, I think, Keith, Edwin and Mark were in front of me, actually.
Okay, that's fine. I'll go to Mark next, then Edwin, then come back to you, David.
So I understand what's been said from the council point of view, but perhaps it's worth thinking about this from the school's point of view. I mean, what we're doing is transferring money from one set of provision to another, and our mainstream schools are facing increasing demands to, as the heads have said it in their responses, to deal with pupils with additional needs, and in the schools where I'm a governor, with needs far in excess of what we were dealing with maybe 5 years ago, before the pandemic. The council's facing challenges in meeting the social care burden for children. Schools are on the front line of that and are having to recruit staff to deal with the problems that they're facing. I can't see at the moment that a 0.5% transfer here solves the council's solvency problem. It's not a big enough, outside a wider strategy, it's not a big enough action to make a significant difference as far as I can see. And moving it out of the schools block, to me, just puts schools under additional pressure. I mean, recruiting staff to do some of these roles is difficult in the locality, and schools who want to employ staff are having to pay more for them. So the pressures are all over the place. I don't think this solves it.
Thank you, Mark. Edwin.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'd like to start by well, firstly thanking Anne-Marie, because I thought the explanation you gave was really, really clear. And whether we agree with what you said or not, I think it was really clear, it was really articulate, and I think we needed to hear it. So thank you. And I know you said this when you met with heads last week, and you repeated the message, and I really appreciate the clarity of what you said. I do think there is an element of robbing Peter to pay Paul here. I totally sympathise with the situation the council's in. But the average uplift for schools next year was going to be 1.9%. If we take this 0.5% off it, the average uplift is going to be 1.4%. Now, I don't know about other head teachers, although I think I can probably guess. It's not going to be possible to run this school on a 1.4% uplift. And all that will be happening is that we will have to be cutting services here in order for this transfer of money to go ahead to the local authority. What we'll be doing, unfortunately, is increasing the SEND need, because we will have to cut services, we'll have to cut what we spend our money on here. And I just add one thing to this as well, which is I've looked very, very carefully at the documentation the authorities put together. And I was looking on page 16, where we've got the paragraph which says the disapplication has been made to transfer whilst progress is being made on reducing the deficit. So the clear statement there is this is happening not just to close the deficit, but because progress is being made on closing the deficit. And reference is then made to the draft SEND strategy for 2023 to 2028. And the idea there is that draft strategy is going to reduce the deficit. Now, I'm afraid to say I don't have confidence in that draft strategy in reducing the deficit. And therefore, if this 0.5% is being used in a sense as a stopgap to allow that strategy to work, that makes me even more nervous. Because essentially what will be happening is money will be transferred away from schools, which would have been spending it on SEND provision, and giving it to a local authority, which has a draft strategy, which I'm not convinced is going to make the difference that the authority perhaps hopes that it will.
Shall I just come to David and then come back to Anne-Marie?
Thanks, Keith. I've got a number of points. Off the back, I'll do it quickly. Off the back of what Edwin just said, in previous iterations, often the SEN strategy has been to increase the kind of provision within schools because we can't afford expensive out of county placements or units within schools as easily. So we're all trying to meet SEN need within our own buildings and therefore need the money. Not to be top sliced. That would be my first point. Anne-Marie, I agree with Edwin that your explanation was excellent, but I think it does suggest that there's a comms issue here. I know I wasn't at the Heads Funding Group, and I apologise. My business manager was. But if it was that big and that significant, I think we should have had a much clearer discussion about it, and then we might have felt better about it. I think part of this is it feels like it's come through the back door, and I don't think that is really helpful. And nor do I think it's helpful for anybody to say that if we don't give 0.5%, that's going to bankrupt the council. No, it isn't. It's going to give you £670,000, which is a sticking plaster on the situation we've got. I think, final point, Keith, if I may, a huge amount of the frustration from heads here, notwithstanding the communication, is that we have been here before. We have been talking about the deficit in the high needs block for years and years and years, and some of us have put hours and hours and hours into cutting potential services in a very careful, prioritised way, and then that didn't happen, which leaves us with frustration, because if it had, perhaps the deficit wouldn't be as big as it is now. I think we all have a huge amount of sympathy with you and with the council's position. I don't want to lose control. I wouldn't want to lose control in the way that you've described, but I think it's a bit of a mess, if I can be so bold, in terms of the comms and the legacy of it over time. Thanks, Keith.
Thank you, David. I'll come to Anne-Marie again.
Thanks, David. And Edwin, I think just to pick up on a couple of points, I think the SEND strategy is in draft form because it wasn't accepted. I agree with your position, Edwin, that the SEND strategy is not going to deliver the savings gap. Really clear on that. I think in terms of a long-term financial strategy and what it is going to turn the tide on the increasing deficit position, I think will be the delivering better value, and essentially that is going to have to be the format that's dictated in terms of the areas of business that we need to look at that in terms of reducing the spend. So that'll be it. And David, as well, I completely accept that there is some comms issues here. It was part of the conversation when we met secondary heads last week. I understand it. I think, I appreciate that there's been a lack of clarity from officers in the council and how we can do business going forward. So I think, my early learning and my early lessons from my time in West Berkshire is really open and honest and upfront communication about the nature and the scale of the problems. And I think what that leads me to is the Delivering Better Value programme. Once officers have better worked up some of the proposals that are in there, I think it's really significant that those proposals and the nature of that Delivering Better Value programme needs to be shared with heads so that you have an early indication about what's in that programme, because you're absolutely right, 670,000 or whatever it is not going to address the overspend position here. It's a mere contribution, which is less than 10% of what the current deficit is. But it's about a signal to the Department of Education. It's a signal of intent about doing things differently. So I understand the position. I understand it's not a panacea. I understand that the communication has been poor. And I think the medium to long term financial strategy that's going to have to approach this will be whatever we do through DBV, and the SEND strategy will have to talk to that financial strategy through the DBV, and we're going to have to do it that way around. So I hear what you're saying, and actually I don't disagree with anything that you're saying to me. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Leslie, should we come to you?
I'm new. This is my second schools forum meeting, so I don't have all your background. I'm used to all the moaning that we all hear, but my understanding was that these meetings were a partnership, and it feels like we're being done to, even though we've spoken and lots of head teachers have shared the difficulties and the pressures they're under. If they want good schools for people to move to West Berkshire, you still need to invest in them. When the early years and the Sure Start money all went, it created problems in primary. It's coming out of primary, it's putting it into secondary. I just feel the mere amount of 600 is actually quite a phenomenal amount of money for schools. And I feel that, you know, I've got my alert bell going, right, forced academisation. I might as well go out on my own and find somewhere to go, because in 2 years, you're not going to be around. Or in 2 years on your Todd, because the partnership in this meeting doesn't feel that it's there. I thought this was a discussion, not you will be told what's happening because of some poor communication. So it would be really nice to feel that this was in partnership rather than done to.
Thank you, Leslie. Jackie, come to you.
Hi, yeah, I'm just curious really as to where all this fits in with the council's capital portfolio, capital assets, and whether there's any possibility of transferring some of the capital portfolio, selling something basically to help reduce the revenue problem.
Thank you. It's probably a good time to come to Councillor Cottingham at this point.
Yeah, right. So answer that initial question on the selling of assets and the transfer from capital to revenue. There's only certain things which we can actually do with that. So, for example, transformation. Melanie will be able to give me a little bit more detail on this, but in reality, we cannot simply move, say, from the balance sheet to the P&L a capital receipt without it qualifying for the necessary transformation program. And the transformation program is actually quite narrow in its scope. So this is where we're looking to invest in making improvements for the future. It's not simply a matter of being able to spend money today, which only has a benefit for today. It has to have a long-term benefit for the residents of West Berkshire. So sort of going sort of forward, you're probably well aware that you know, the council has just come under new administration from May. So, you know, what's the past is the past. I have no way of being able to control or really knowing what actually happened in the previous 18 years. And similarly, we've had the same government in power for the last 13 years. And one of the things which I'm hearing on a recurring basis is a lack of investment from central government into education, into services as such. And we are where we are with this, and I fully hear everyone's pushback on losing 0.5% budget. And I know it's very easy for me to say it only works out £10,000 per school, which in reality is probably going to be a couple of TAs, etc. Losing £10,000, yes, it is significant to everyone's budget. But as Anne-Marie communicated, this is a statement of intent to the DfE that we are trying to reduce the deficit of 9 million. And as she stated earlier, without reducing the deficit, the council will basically be bankrupt. And that would mean commissioners coming in place. And again, I hear what your pushback, and I fully understand it, but we are where we are. We have to have a plan of action to reduce this deficit.
Thank you. David.
Yeah, I'm slightly worried that I haven't consulted with my head teacher colleagues on what I'm about to say. And by the way, Leslie, I thought what you said was bang on. Would 0.25% be a more palatable compromise position? Because I understand what Anne-Marie is saying about needing to be seen for the DFE to be putting some money aside to read.
David,
I just wondered whether that might allow for the kind of. Go on, that's fine.
Sorry, I thought you'd stopped. I think your communication went off for a second. Sorry.
Oh, my mic is a bit dodgy. Sorry, Keith. Yeah, so I'm just suggesting 0.25 instead of 0.5. Lots of SEN strategy going back into schools, so we need the money, but it might return us more to the kind of goodwill and partnership position that Leslie suggested was really important in School Forum.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, David, and I do wonder if obviously the message from heads is very clear on the consultation, but equally the message from the council is also very clear, and I do wonder if the Schools Forum were to make a compromise in that sense, whether that could be something that, I don't know, that's a possibility. Gemma.
So just really a question for Anne-Marie about kind of the procedure. It was mentioned at heads funding, but it wasn't in the paperwork. So there was that kind of, we were notified that it was something that was being that was going on in the background. Does it matter what comes out of this meeting today? So if we went to 0.25 or even indeed 0.5, would that have, silly to say 0.5, but would it make any difference to the disapplication process? If we still voted 0 today, would 0.5 still be progressed by the local authority for the disapplication? And the secondary question would be, is it definitely 0.5 that would be considered following this conversation, or is there a consideration at the local authority to then revisit the options, given that we've had a good discussion, we've heard everyone's contributions in the round, and there may well be a chance that the local authority go back and say, actually, on this time around, we don't want to do that, but it's something that we've heard and we've consulted and we feel that it's not part of the strategy at present. That's really
I mean, yeah, thanks, Gemma. Sorry, Chair, I jumped straight in there. I think it's a matter, first and foremost, it's now a matter for the DFE. They will ultimately decide on this. I think, not having spoken to my colleagues, so I'm going to channel a little bit of David. I think, having not spoken to council colleagues, I'm wondering if we take the 0.25, that would be something. We take the 0.25, if Schools Forum were to agree 0.25, and we have, I think what we have done then is signal an intent, one, that we are prepared to work together, that we're prepared to work in partnership, that we are starting off now in this new DBV challenge, if you like, in a more compromised position. Just for clarity, the reason we said 0.5 to the DFE, Gemma, is because that's the maximum we can go to without actually needing approval. So we could come back and go back from that and go, well, Schools Forum have told us 0.25. Are we happy with 0.25? And we'll say yes. And I feel fairly confident that if you voted on 0.25 and we accepted the 0.25, then that would be his position and we could draw a line under it. Corporate and member colleagues might not be satisfied that we've said that, but I think it is a nod in the right direction, and I think it does it signals a different intent to us being in a position where essentially it would be one of confrontation, wouldn't it? Which I'd be keen to avoid, because it's not going to get us over the line with the challenges that we've got over the next 2 years.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I'll come to Paul and then on to Councillor Codling after.
Thank you, Chair. So my question, I've heard very clearly what Anne-Marie has explained, and again, I would like to echo what everybody else has said. The explanation has been very helpful, and our understanding of that, certainly my understanding of that, is now very much greater. My question, and we've sort of danced around the 600K is not really going to make a huge amount of difference. My question that I'm still struggling with is, so where is the rest of that 9 million going to come from in the next 2 years? What is the next thing that's going to be on the agenda where if we don't do the right thing, then again, it will be back to the question of, well, the council will be bankrupt and will end up being run by commissioners. It doesn't feel like there is a solution that's at scale that's going to get us to a resolution which is going to come with any outcome other than the council will be bankrupt in 2 years' time. Or we're going to close an awful lot of schools between now and then, because whilst I think Councillor Cottingham explained that it's only 10,000 per school or a couple of TAs, in the case of the school that I'm a governor of, that would close our school. So how many schools will have to close as a result of this? I mean, my main question is, what else has got to be done? What else have we got to agree financially? I'm not asking the question about whether my school has got to close or not. That's just an inevitability if that's the route we're going. But I'd rather know that now than in a year's time. Thank you.
I think through you, Chair, it's the Delivering Better Value programme, Paul, that we've referenced, that will have multiple lines of approach to this. So one of those that's suggested by DFE at present is looking at top-ups and the rates of top-ups. It's about looking at the payments to maintained and independent maintained special schools, for example. It's around the strategic and operational commissioning approaches to securing this support. It's also, as colleagues have already referenced on the call this evening, it's about supporting units in mainstream schools rather than funding independent maintained special, for example. So there's not one single route to this, and this is not about whether we close schools or we don't close schools. We've got a certain number of pupils in West Berkshire. Those pupils are funded through the Dedicated Schools Grant. The challenge on this, and the challenge on this, is about that high needs block spend and the fact that we need to reduce the spend on high needs, and we need to turn that deficit position into a balanced position, because that position is going to be the responsibility of the local authority in a way that it has never ever been the responsibility of the local authority. Now, if we had a crystal ball, we might be able to sit back and take a degree of comfort in that potentially a change of government next spring, or potentially more money coming into children's and education services, but it looks unlikely. And I think the government strategy, and I was at a conference last week and heard from the junior minister, but also heard about from shadow ministers about their approach to education. So the two major political parties are both suggesting that their approach to education is one of inclusion, which is going to place more pressure on all of us to keep more children in more mainstream schools, because that's very much what we've been told. It was written large through the Green White Paper, I can't keep up, last year, around that SEND and AP improvement. So we're going to have to look at an approach to educating our children which is inclusive, which is not reliant on really expensive independent special. So I don't know what that answer is, but there's no indication that there's any more money coming into the system, and it's a challenge that nationally many bodies are grappling with. But it's certainly not an approach around, well, are we going to close your school or not, because your pupils will still be somewhere and your pupils will therefore still be funded. So it's not about closing schools or otherwise, it's about bringing that high needs block into balance.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Codlin.
Thank you. I'm not going to repeat anything that anybody else has said, but what I am hearing now is the fact that we have a will to want to work together. I thought for a little while it was going to be a bit loggerheads, but I think we need to have these conversations more often, and actually try and come up with ideas and ways that we can work together and actually keeps children in mainstream schooling wherever possible. That is obviously the best outcome for them, to keep them in their local communities. They do so much better than having to sit on a minibus going somewhere, you know, half an hour to get to a school for a special needs. I understand that some children will have to do that, but I just see that we do need to work together quite closely on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie.
For the high needs budget, does it cover 0 to 25, that pot?
I believe so. I understand.
So what proportion is taken from other places? Because a lot of university placements and things like that are incredibly expensive. And obviously I'd like to know where other funds are coming from, because I don't know whether proportionally we always take a certain amount from schools based on the pupil numbers. But obviously if we're funding a very large block there, then, you know, where else is it being taken from to support those children's needs?
So children that are known to the local authority that are in university, if they're looked after children, that comes out of the social care budget. So that doesn't come from the high needs block. The high needs block is money that's spent on SEND from naught into further education predominantly. I know Jane's on the call and she'll tell me if we're putting in additional support to children that are at university, but it would be, so Nicola's shitting her head to know it's children that are actually in school. Thanks, Nicola. And it goes into further education, but it doesn't go beyond that into university.
Right, I think we need to wrap this up soon, but Gemma, if I come to you.
Yeah, I think given the legacy of focusing on the deficit and then not actually taking those actions over the years, and hearing that the rhetoric in this group's definitely, or that we've been given as a group, is that the government need to give more money for high needs block, and that will come when they see how big a problem there is. So Heather, I hear what you're saying about the right placement for children and keeping them in mainstream. Absolutely subscribe to that. I think most of us do. However, I'm really keen that we avoid the kind of sweeping rhetoric across this group. Things such as they're better off on in their local setting than being on a minibus to a different setting, a special setting, because I think the reality on the ground is that there is such high need that the specialist provision that those children require, regardless of whether it's in their home setting or not, is what they must get, not specifically where they get it. The transport thing is a whole nother piece of the party and the puzzle that's nothing to do with this conversation right now. And I'm really mindful of the fact that we have to be really careful about how we create that provision and make it sustainable, both financially but educationally. I don't think there's a basis upon which to demonstrate that academically children are better not getting on a minibus than they are getting on a minibus. So it's tricky. I get it. We absolutely must find a way through the deficit recovery plan in order, or at least have one, in order to see through that funding saving over time.
Thank you, Gemma. Okay, so I know we've got to vote on all the other sections, but as we've spent such a long time discussing this, I think it probably makes sense to come to a vote on this one now, and then come back through the others. So having listened to David and what other people have said, I'd like to propose that we recommend a 0.25% transfer from the schools block to the high needs block, whilst noting that that is contrary to what the majority of heads that responded said. Do I find a seconder for that? David, thank you. Thank you. Jess, I hand over to you for the vote for that one.
Yes, Chair. So this is a named vote with all school representatives. If you can indicate if you're for or against the proposal. Okay, so Catherine Burney.
I'm not trying to avoid, but I feel because I have a vested interest in the high needs block and also haven't been to any previous meetings, I'd prefer to go with a majority on this one.
Jackie Davies.
I too have a vested interest because my service is paid for through the high needs block, but I would go for 0.25%, yes.
Okay. Paul Davey.
I support the 0.25%.
Keith Harvey.
4.
Trevor Keeble.
Against.
Gemma Piper.
4.
Chris Prosser.
Against.
David Ramsden.
For the 0.25%, with huge reservation, but for.
Leslie Roberts.
Against, because we haven't spoken to our colleagues.
Ant Sizer.
Against.
Campbell Smith.
4.
Okay, so
Sorry, do I get a vote?
oh, sorry, I didn't see who that.
I thought I'd get that just in case it ended up being the casting vote, which you don't want to have.
Sorry, Edwin. Sorry, yes.
4.
Here's 1, 2, 3. So I can confirm that that is carried.
Okay, so that, I think that's a reluctant carry. I think that would be fair to say, but and I think on the part of everyone that voted for, I think that almost everyone who voted for that is reluctantly done, but necessarily done. I think probably. Right. Okay, where we are, Melanie. I'll come back to you for the other sections of this.
Yes. If I can just oh, I see Trevor has a hand up.
Sorry, Trevor's got his hand up. Shall I just?
Yeah, can I understand, does that mean that the local authority will therefore not be going ahead with 0.5? Because in a later paper, Agenda Item 12, they actually say they are going ahead with it with 0.5. So does that mean we will be getting, is that a definite, the local authority won't be going for 0.5? That's an Anne-Marie question.
I don't want to answer for Anne-Marie, but I guess that is a decision for members to make. Is that correct?
Thanks, Chair. My recommendation to members at this stage would be that we take 0.25%, and I think because Councillor Cottingham and Councillor Heather Codling have been on the call, I think I'll take that up. Melanie and I can have a conversation with Joseph, Ian and Heather tomorrow to make a final position, but my recommendation on the back of this conversation would be 0.25.
Thank you.
Sorry, Melanie, back to you.
I can see Jackie's hand up as well.
Oh, sorry, I missed that, Jackie.
Yeah, it was just really that I think we're all in a very difficult position here, and nobody's comfortable with any of this. But we do recognise that there are financial issues and they've got to be addressed. But it's very, very uncomfortable being in this position.
Okay, Melanie, sorry, we'll try and press on.
Okay. I just wanted to go back to the sparsity because I have the answers to the questions. We have 22 schools that get some sparsity funding, of which 10 of those is more than £8,000. Some of them are small; they sort of range from £500 up to the 8K, but 10 of them over 8K. And for the consultation of the 24 responses, only 6 were from sparse schools. Right, so I'll just move on for the rest and then we can do all the voting on the other bits. So question 5, nobody wanted to support anything other than high needs, so we can move past that one. Question 6, this was another one for discussion, the falling roles. So it was 12 didn't want to introduce the fund, 7 did. However, Heads Funding Group wanted a discussion on this. So I'll open it to the group again.
Does anyone have anything to add on falling roles? Trevor, I'm assuming your hand is a legacy hand at the moment.
So that's a dead hand.
Yeah. Anyone got anything they'd like to say on falling roles? If not, I guess we'd probably recommend that we go with the majority in that case. But when we vote, obviously.
Okay, come back on the vote, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so question 7 was 100% yes about setting criteria for other funds. Question 8 we'll come to in the D delegations anyway, but the support was fully in favour of those. Question 9 on the clawback, we're not going to discuss tonight. It was discussed at Heads Funding Group, but they wanted to better understand all the implications. So we've actually got a meeting tomorrow night to do that, and it will come to a special schools forum later in the month. And then question 10 was supporting the rest of the scheme for financing schools. So now we can do the voting.
Okay, so I think Jess, if you'd like to do the sort of ones that don't involve any controversy first, and then we'll just look at the last couple, I think, after that.
Okay, so are we going to take recommendation A and B together?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. So this is a vote with all school representatives. If you can indicate if you're for or against the proposals. Okay, Catherine Burney.
Sorry, I'm unsure as to what the A and B refers to. Sorry, it's my first meeting, so I have read the paperwork and I can understand all of the falling roles, funds, and questions 7 and 8 and so on, but I don't know what A and B refers to.
Yeah, so recommendation A is to mirror the Department for Education's 24-25 national funding formula to calculate the funding applications. And the recommendation B is to address any surplus or shortfall in funding by adjusting the ORPU values.
Okay, again, would you mind coming back to me on that one, please?
Yeah, no problem. So Jackie Davies.
Yeah, same for me. I need to think about this. I'm confused by it.
Paul Davey. Paul Davey. If he's fallen off.
Forgive me, no.
Oh no, there you are.
I'm struggling with my unmute button. The technology is fighting back. I apologise too. I'm slightly struggling to understand exactly what I'm voting for here.
So just to clarify, this is for recommendation A, B. This is the ones that were completely uncontroversial, that 100%, I think 100% of people voted, 100% of heads voted for. So that is what we are voting for, which is the mirroring the national funding formula across our schools, and any surplus or shortfall in funding, adjusting the pupil weighted the pupil adjusted amounts accordingly.
Thank you, Chair. I support both of those.
Okay, so I've obviously got some hands up there. So Gemma, I'll just come to you.
Excuse me.
Yeah, so I think because we took a vote on one of the areas, it's completely discombobulated everybody, Keith.
Yeah.
So I think just explaining, we're going back to agenda item 6, right at the beginning, page 6. If you start at that page, we're going back to the beginning again, and now we're voting as if it was 0.25 as the proposal halfway through.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, that's my fault.
Confirming.
Okay, so Paul Davey had 4. Keith Harvey.
4.
Trevor Keeble.
4.
Gemma Piper.
4.
Chris Prosser.
4.
David Ramsden.
4.
Leslie Roberts.
4.
Ant Sizer.
4.
Campbell Smith.
4.
And Catherine Burney, do you wish to? Yeah.
Now I know what I'm voting for. 4.
And Edwin Towell as well. Yeah.
Edwin Towell, sorry, yes.
I will be 4.
And also Jackie Davies.
Yeah, 4. I understand it now.
Okay, I confirm that's carried.
Okay, in which case, shall we move on to recommendation C, the sparsity factor? We might as well do these in order, otherwise we're going to get really confused. So this is the sparsity factor, and I think from the discussions that people have been saying today, I guess possibly the recommendation needs to be that we go for the full sparsity factor by the sounds of things. Would anyone like to propose that? Gemma, thank you. And do we have a seconder? Chris, thank you. Okay, over to you, Jess.
Okay, so this is a vote with all school representatives. So Catherine Burney.
Yeah, 4.
Jackie Davies.
4.
Paul Davey.
4.
Keith Harvey.
4.
Trevor Keeble.
4.
Gemma Piper.
4.
Chris Prosser.
4.
David Ramsden.
Against, sorry, Jess, I'd go for the minimum.
Leslie Roberts.
I have an interest, but I'm 4, but I have spoken to a group of heads about it because we'll all get different amounts, but we're 4.
Ant Sizer.
4.
Campbell Smith.
4.
Edwin Towell.
Against.
Okay, I can confirm that's carried.
Thank you. Okay, so if we go on to recommendation, I've lost which recommendation it is now, E. Whether we're going to reinstate the falling rolls, but no one had any strong feelings on this, but the if I'm right in reading the pie chart, which I've got in black and white, unfortunately, but I think is 12 saying no versus 7 saying yes. So I guess the recommendation therefore should be not to reintroduce the falling rolls fund. Is there a proposer for that? David, thank you. And a seconder? Gemma, thank you. Over to you, Jess.
Okay, so this is a vote with all school representatives again. So Catherine Burney.
Again, apologies, I haven't been part of any discussion on this, so I would have to go with the majority.
Okay. Jackie Davies.
No. Sorry, we're voting for no, aren't we? So 4 no, yes.
Paul Davey.
Yeah, I support the motion.
Keith Harvey.
Again, I support the motion. I think it's the best way of putting it.
Trevor Keeble.
Support.
Gemma Piper.
Yeah, 4.
Chris Prosser.
4.
David Ramsden.
4.
Leslie Roberts.
4.
Ant Sizer.
Against.
Campbell Smith.
4.
Edwin Towell.
4.
I can confirm that's carried.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to recommendation F. So this is to approve the criteria used to allocate additional funds. Do we have a proposer for that? Paul, thank you. And a seconder? David, thank you. Over to you, Jess.
Okay, so this is a vote with all forum members. So Catherine Burney.
Again, I don't like to opt out of making a decision, but not having been part of any discussion and only having read the papers, I find it difficult to say either for or against without agreeing with the majority, I'm afraid.
Okay, Reverend Mark Bennett.
4.
Jackie Davies.
4.
Paul Davey.
4.
Richard Hand.
4.
Keith Harvey.
4.
Trevor Keeble.
4.
Gemma Piper,
4,
Chris Prosser,
4,
David Ramsden,
4,
Leslie Roberts,
4,
Ant Sizer,
sorry, 4,
Campbell Smith,
4,
and Edwin Towell.
Like Catherine, I don't feel I know enough, so I'm going to abstain.
I can confirm that's carried.
Thank you very much. So recommendation G, we're going to do under a separate item. H will be in a separate meeting. So we come finally on to recommendation I, which is to approve the changes to 2023-24 scheme for financing schools, which I think didn't have any votes against, if I'm correct. Do we have a proposer for that? Look on my screen. Paul, thank you. And seconder? Gemma, thank you. To you, Jess.
Sorry, sorry, Gemma. The seconder has to be a maintained
David also for
school. Okay, thank you. Okay, so as said, so this is a named vote with all maintained representatives. So Catherine Burney.
I support 4.
Jackie Davies.
4,
Paul Davey.
4,
Keith Harvey.
4,
Chris Prosser.
4,
David Ramsden.
4,
Leslie Roberts.
4,
Ant Sizer.
4.
I can confirm that's carried.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, let's move on to agenda item 7, the budgets for additional funds, and I'll come to you, Melanie, on that.
Thank you. Yes, so this is just to go through 2 elements. One is about growth funding and falling roles allocations, and the other one is about the additional high needs. So we get additional funding from the DFE. It has yet to be announced. It's usually announced later in December. And we get this for growth funding based on differences between primary and secondary numbers on roll between October 22 and October 23 censuses. And in 24-25, for the first time, they're also going to allocate funding if they've seen falling rolls as well. So we've done some estimates. They provide a calculator. And it looks like we will get about 140k of funding due to falling roles, and combined with that, the total for growth and falling roles, we should get about 647k. We don't think we need any of that for growth. We've still got enough in our historic growth fund. So the proposal is to put that all into the schools funding formula to distribute to all schools. And as we've also just voted not to have a falling roles fund, we would also put the 140k in. So that funding pot benefits all schools according to the formula. The second part of the report is just about additional high needs funding, where we've always traditionally set aside some of the high needs block to award to those schools that qualify for the additional funding. And the recommendation this year is that we set aside 150k of that budget for that. So that's it for the report. Happy to take any comments if you'd like, or if not, we can go straight to a vote on the recommendations.
Does anyone have any comments on that? No, in that case, we'll go straight to a vote on the recommendations in that case. Do we have a proposer for those recommendations? Chris, thank you. And a seconder? I'll look through my screen. David, thank you. Okay, Jess, over to you.
So it's me. Sorry, it's on the first recommendation. It's an all school members vote. So Catherine Burney.
4,
Jackie Davies.
4,
Paul Davey.
4,
Keith Harvey.
4,
Trevor Keeble.
4,
Gemma Piper.
4,
Chris Prosser.
4,
David Ramsden.
4,
Leslie Roberts,
4,
Ant Sizer,
4,
Campbell Smith,
4,
and Edwin Towell.
4.
That's carried, Chair.
Thank you very much. And then we move on to recommendation 2.2, which is to set the additional high needs fund at 150,000. Again, do I have a proposer for that? David, thank you. And a seconder? Edwin, thank you. And we'll take the vote, Sadie.
And this is a vote with all forum members. So Reverend Mark Bennett,
4,
Catherine Burney,
4,
Jackie Davis,
4,
Paul Davey,
4,
Richard Hand,
4,
Keith Harvey,
4,
Trevor Keeble,
4,
Gemma Piper,
4,
Chris Prosser,
4,
David Ramsden,
4,
Leslie Roberts,
4,
Ant Sizer,
4,
Campbell Smith,
4.
and Edwin Towell.
4.
That's carried again, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we can move on to agenda item 8, which is the final dedelegation proposals. If I can hand over to Lisa to introduce this.
Yes, hello. So we have looked at the costs of these dedelegations in previous meetings. What we have now in Appendix A is a breakdown based on the most recent census data. So that would be the amount that each individual school is charged. And this is covering our therapeutic thinking support team, the ethnic minority support team, trade union representation, CLEAPS, and school improvement and governance services, as well as the education functions and also the health and safety services to schools. The one change we've had from previous years is that there was a suggestion we could do the ethnic minority service on a per pupil basis, rather than previously it's been based on the number of learners that are using English as an additional language. Hopefully it's something that we do every year and you're familiar with the papers and the processes.
Thank you. Do we have any comments or questions on that? Okay, in which case we've got 3 recommendations. So recommendation 2.1 is that representatives of maintained primary and secondary schools choose a basis to recharge the cost of the ethnic minority service. So the proposal is to change that to on the per pupil basis rather than a per pupil with English and additional language basis. And as it was me that suggested that in the first place, I'd like to propose that. I think I don't know if do we find a seconder for that. David, thank you. If we carry out the vote, Jess, if that's okay.
Yeah, so this is a vote with maintained secondary and primary members. So Paul Davey.
4,
Keith Harvey.
4,
Chris Prosser.
4,
David Ramsden.
4,
Leslie Roberts.
4,
And Ant Sizer.
4.
I confirm that's carried.
Thank you. The second one, recommendation 2.2, is for representatives of maintained primary schools to agree to dedelegate the funds for behaviour support services, ethnic minority support, trade union representation, CLEAPS, school improvement, statutory and regulatory duties, and health and safety. Do we need a proposal and a seconder for each of these? I think we probably do we?
Yes,
There's not many of us have maintained primary, so I'll propose it, I guess. Do we have a secondary sector? Paul, thank you.
Okay, so all maintained primary school members. So Paul Davey.
4,
Keith Harvey.
4,
And Leslie Roberts.
4.
Yeah, confirm that's carried.
Okay, so we move on to recommendation 2.3, which is exactly the same, I think, but for maintained secondary schools. So do we have, there's not many of you here, so do we have a proposer for that? David, thank you, and a seconder. Chris, thank you.
Okay, so Chris Prosser.
For.
David Ramsden.
For.
And Ant Sizer.
For.
Okay, confirm that's carried.
Okay, and then finally, we have the recommendation 2.4, which is very similar for maintain special nursery and PRU heads to agree to de-delegate funds for trade union, CLEAPS, statutory and regulatory duties, and health and safety service. Do we have a quorum for?
We do, yeah. So we just need the one member here to carry this one. We've got two, so we're good to go.
Great.
So, sorry,
yeah.
Do we have a proposer and seconder?
Do you have a proposer, Jackie? Thank you, and a seconder. Catherine, thank you.
I can confirm that's carried.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Okay, in which case we move on to item 9, which is an update on the high needs budget investor save projects. This was a slightly later paper, I think, but I believe I'm handing over to Jane and Nicola.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I would just like to quickly draw attention to the projects which have been funded initially as investor save projects in 22-23. And you can see that there were 3 projects there, and one was a 0.4 full-time equivalent post in the early development and inclusion team. There was also a full-time social emotional mental health worker and additional iCollege places. You'll see there's actually 4 projects there, but one of those, the SEND training project, has become funded through another source, which is positive. So we're looking here at those 3 projects. The report sets out the impact of those projects. Early years is a particular priority in the SEND strategy and will be in DBV, because we see a high number of children acquiring EHCPs, ongoing into school at 5. We also see a high number of our transfers into special schools in that age group. And SEMH is obviously also a significant driver in our independent or maintained special school placements. So all of these projects fit with those priorities in terms of reducing pressure on the high needs block. I won't go through all of the text there. Hopefully people have had a chance to read it, and Nicola and I can take questions. I would though just like to say that in view of the position with the high needs block, there is a change to the recommendation with this paper, which was originally that these projects should continue into next year and have permanent funding through the high needs block. We are no longer making that recommendation, and it is proposed that if the schools block transfer goes ahead or clawback, that potentially if the meeting approves these projects, that they could be funded through those sources. But it's not being proposed that they're funded through high needs block at this stage.
Anne-Marie.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to add to what Jane has just said, I think given, and forgive me because this is a late decision of mine today, I didn't think it was legitimate given the difficulty of the conversations that we have had today about the clawback from high needs block. I think what I would be asking Schools Forum for is an agreement in principle that this activity supported us in terms of investing to save money over the longer term, notwithstanding the point I think Gemma made earlier that do we actually see where we're investing and it is saving money. So I appreciate that. I think what I would want to know is if Schools Forum were supportive of these different activities in principle, then we would come back at a later date to seek agreement as to how this activity would be funded given the pressures that we've got on the high needs block. So I think it's not to jump right ahead and make an assumption, where they'd be funded from. I think that's a wider conversation, and maybe we can pick that up in the subsequent schools forum in January, but an agreement in principle that the activity was positively welcomed and was making a difference to schools before we determine exactly how it's funded, because it will need to tie into anything that we're doing on delivering better value and any decisions we make about high needs block spend going forward. I hope I've made that clearer, not more complicated.
I think so. So I think what you're asking for is for us to make a vote on agreeing this in principle rather than actually deciding on where to take the budget from. Okay, thank you. Trevor.
Yeah, in my version, there's no comment from the head teachers. So I just wondered if there was a view from a head teachers forum on this.
I think I left the head teachers forum, the heads funding forum before this was discussed, so I don't think I heard it was part of the discussion. Was anyone there for that?
So it's blank in the paper. It's just a blank paragraph, isn't
it? Jane.
Melanie may be able to confirm, but my recollection is that the heads funding group approves the projects.
Thank you. Michelle?
Yeah, it's correct. I think you're looking at an earlier version, Trevor, that went out but was recalled. The latest to follow report does have the recommendation included in it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess, Michelle, did you have anything else that you didn't know? That's fine. Chris?
Yeah, just a point that when we've had transfers in the past to the high needs block from the schools block, they have gone into the Invest to Save projects. So wouldn't it make sense if the decision is that it's 0.25 going across, that 0.25 would be used for this initiative or these initiatives, or contribute to at least?
Yeah, thank you. And I guess if we're going to go ahead with the recommendation as it's stated here, which is that permanent funding in the high needs block is agreed for the edit teacher and the SEMH worker, then almost it, I suppose, is immaterial as to where the origin of that money is from. Does that make sense? I think that's correct, unless I'm wrong.
I think, Chair, through you, I think that was the original proposal, but I think given the tension and rightly so around the high needs block and the transfer, I didn't want to presume that we were saying, look, we haven't got enough money in the high needs block, but let's spend this part of the high needs block on this activity. So I think it was really important that sequentially school leaders are able to make a decision about what is most important for them and not jump ahead if decisions are moving, which is essentially where we're at now. And I do accept the point that Chris has just made. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is not me saying I'm adverse to saying we're making that transfer, let's spend that transfer on this activity. That would be nice and clean and tidy, but I didn't want to preempt any decision. I would support the point that Chris has just made or any other, but I didn't want to jump ahead and assume that you were being railroaded into another position that you didn't agree with. And it didn't feel, I didn't want a conversation to feel disingenuous that we're saying we haven't got enough money, but can we spend it on this? I wanted time to consider and understand how these things will bed in as we go through, because in the grand scheme of what decisions we're going to have to make over the next 6, 12, 18 months around high needs block, is this going to be a priority? And I know we don't know what's to come, but I just wanted to maybe slow it down and not jump ahead too far.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, I was just going to support Anne-Marie and Chris's position. So I think prior to this meeting, we didn't know what was going to be voted in terms of transfer, but I think it makes sense from what Chris is saying that this activity could be the proposal, that this activity is supported by the transfer now that we've agreed it.
Okay, can I ask, does this have to be agreed in this meeting? Because I think possibly we'd be better off waiting and making that decision in the next meeting rather than being sort of rushed into it at this point.
It could be that we agree in principle the intention and come back, as Anne-Marie first suggested, to the funding at the next meeting. So at least we've got a steer.
I think, Chair, sorry, I think given that there are other issues that we want to discuss in more detail with the clawback, I think is the main issue, and I know heads will be keen to understand more about DBV and how that's going to work. I think given this is related to high needs block spend, I think these decisions can't be made in isolation. I don't think any decisions can be made in isolation now where the high needs block's concerned, and I'd feel much more comfortable if heads thought that they had long enough to consider the implications, but also to better understand, again, back to the point that was made earlier by colleagues, to understand what is it actually saving and how do we quantify that. Now we can have the age-old argument about how you quantify prevention activity, and the reality is you can't, but we would want to know that what this spend was going on was stopping spend somewhere else, and whatever that might look like, and it won't be an exact science, but I think we need to leave a trail behind us now that would be appropriately auditable, that we can demonstrate that the decisions that we're making today around high needs block spend are legitimate in terms of the long-term position that we're in. So that it is where it may not be easy to quantify it, at least we can show our, as teachers say quite often, I'm sure still today, so we can show our working out as to how we've made these decisions and got to the answer we've got to.
Okay. So I guess then that rather than the recommendation that's there, I suppose perhaps a show of hands as to whether people agree in principle with taking this forward, I suppose. Would that be acceptable, I think? So if people would like to sort of just do perhaps a show of hands on screen just to show if they're in agreement in principle. I think that's certainly a majority, I would say. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Majority, yeah.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, should we move on to agenda item 10 then? These are items for discussion. So we've got the provisional DSG funding settlement. Melanie.
Thank you. Yes, this doesn't really need much discussion. It's just setting out where we are with the provisional allocation. It'll be firmed up in later this month. But obviously, just to point out, there's a couple of things in there that reference a 0.5% transfer. So I'll bring a refreshed one of those to the next meeting. And also, we should have the final allocations by then and confirmation of all the growth funding.
Thank you. Any comments on that at all from anyone? No. Okay, on to item 11, draft high needs block proposals. So we didn't have a paper on this. So I think, Jane, are you talking to us one, I think?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair. So we have, as we always do at this time of year, been looking at the high needs block and the likely position for the end of this financial year and also for the new financial year. This time last year, we predicted that by the end of 23-24, we would be likely to be in a position of around 9 million overspend, which included the deficit budget which was set for this year, plus a number of previous years rolled forward overspends. That is still looking quite accurate. But what we can't give you at the moment, because it is going to be impacted by DBV, is where we think we're likely to be in 24-25 in terms of the in-year spend in relation to the budget. And the reason for that is that the sort of timelines with DBV haven't worked out all that well. The initial piece of work we did was really what things might look like without DBV, because at that stage we were still working our way through the DBV process. So what we now need to do is look at what that might look like without DBV and how we might be able to change that position for next year, taking DBV into account and costing our potential savings as a result of DBV. So we're not able at the moment to give you a position for 24-25, but that's what we're working on currently.
Okay, thank you very much, Jane. Does anyone have any comments on or questions on that? No. Okay, I guess we'll be more detailed at the next meeting. Item 12, draft central services budget, Lisa.
Yeah, this is just a draft at the moment because we've not yet had a final figure for the allocation we've got for the current year, for next year, and also we still awaiting some information around the cost of the licenses. So our provisional allocation is just 0.25% lower than what we've had for the current year, which is good because in previous years we've had a substantial reduction in the grant. So it's unfortunate it's still going down, but obviously our costs for staffing is still going up within that block. So at the moment, what we're looking at in 5.1 is a table showing where the changes are from the current year compared to what we need for the future year. Based on what we know at the moment, we'll be around £38,000 short, but I believe there is some scope for some savings around the capita system, but we're still trying to finalise what those figures are going to be for 24-25. So we're hoping to be able to balance the block by savings from the capita system, but that's something for us to work over the next couple of weeks, and we'll bring something back to the next meeting, hopefully balancing it.
Okay, thank you very much. Trevor, I think you put a question on that.
Yeah, just a question about fines. Does the West Berkshire Council have a sort of a view of so income from fines is 11,000? Is that something which you will be pushing, or is that something which just happens and you let come through as they come through?
Sorry, what was the first part of your question? Sorry, the finances, you say?
So yeah, the finances. So for fines, income from fines, you've got £11,000.
Yes.
And what I'm saying is that a decision that you will be pushing more fines to try and get more income, or are you just letting it happen as it happens?
I guess that's for the service to answer. It's fines around taking children out of school during school times rather than holiday times. I guess that's one for the service to reply on if somebody wants to take it. No.
I'm not sure. I mean, I know that there are a variety of different approaches in different schools on fines, and I don't know. I don't think there is a sort of local authority-wide agreed way forward on that. So different schools take different positions, I think. Thank you. Anyway, so I don't think we could. So maybe we can add that as an action to find that. For you.
Okay.
Okay. If we move on to item, what are we on now? 13, delivering better value. Over to Jane.
Thank you. So delivering better value has been referenced a few times in this meeting. What we've tried to do in this report is to explain the process which we've been going through now since the late summer, starting really in about July. The report describes the 3 modules of the delivering better value process. Module 1 is looking at data in a lot of detail to assess where the key drivers are in terms of high needs block pressures and where the position might go without any mitigations. It also looks at the impact of existing mitigations. So, for example, we already have Castlett Field, we're planning the Kennet Valley provision, and so on and so forth. So those will be costed into the mitigated growth. But then it also looks at what further action needs to be taken through the implementation plan. So as well as looking at data, module 2 really does a much deeper dive into drivers, and that includes a lot of activity like case studies, listening forums with a whole range of different professionals, including SENCOs, social workers, health colleagues, parents, and talking to children. There have been surveys with parents, surveys of schools. So there's been a lot of data that's been pulled together, which culminated in an implementation day where school colleagues were represented, where we looked at the findings and discussed what the implementation plan might look like. This has all needed to move very, very quickly. I would say one of the issues we found with the process is that Module 1 and Module 2 take up quite a lot of time. We're not able to come up with an implementation plan until we've got to the end of those modules and we have all of the data that we need to pull together and all of the information from co-production with various stakeholders. So the window of time then at the end of the process to pull together a plan is very, very tight. We are in the process of doing that at the moment. And we can certainly share that with head teachers following this meeting. I hope that people who have been part of the process, whether it's through case reviews or listening forums or the implementation day, will recognise what they see when they see the draft plan, which is yet to be approved by the DfE. But as Anne-Marie has said, we're trying to concentrate on change which will be transformational and which will change systems in the longer term so that we can achieve a sustainable position. And just to give you a flavour of that, we're looking at really strengthening our commissioning activity. So we can look at unit costs and particularly unit costs of our independent and non-maintained placements. We are looking at a review of our own bandings for our own provision. As part of that process, there will be a detailed special school sufficiency exercise because whilst we have new places at our special schools coming on stream, for example at Castle and Brookfields over the next couple of years, they haven't come on stream quickly enough to meet need, and that's meant some more independent non-maintained placements which perhaps could have been avoided. So we're looking at strengthening our data function and our sufficiency planning so that we can try to make sure that those provisions and those capital investments can be there when we need them to reduce those placements because we have a much clearer picture of our long-term demand. We're also looking at investing in our local offer to make sure that schools and parents understand what is already available and how to access it. Because some of the things that came out of our investigations and case studies was that sometimes there were services that could have been accessed before a case got to the point of going to an independent placement, but perhaps that didn't happen for various reasons. In addition, we are looking very specifically at transition points because what's come out very clearly, and we already knew this and had put this into the draft SEND strategy, but it's really been brought into sharp relief, is that our key pressure points for those costly placements is early years in terms of our children going into our maintained special school placements, and it's secondary transfer or shortly after secondary transfer as a result of breakdown of placements in year 7 and year 8, where we're seeing a high number of children going into independent placements. So we are looking at additional staff to support with those transition processes, to create processes which will then be available in the longer term and to pilot those processes, and also putting some funding around that so that we can pilot new approaches around transition and actually give the schools some money to do that. We are looking as well at our SIS service, that's our outreach service from our special schools, because there's a lot of expertise there in terms of trying to keep children in mainstream schools, as opposed to our own maintained special schools, and potentially investing in that too. As I say, this is having to be pulled together very, very quickly within a very, very tight time frame, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of the general direction of travel. And as I say, we can share what we have so far following this meeting.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that? Mark?
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go after this item, but I did want to ask a question. This talks about unit costs, and I'm wondering whether those are per pupil costs or whether they're weighted for need.
That would be the weighted pupil cost for children in any with an EHCP, and that could be in mainstream, it could be in our own maintained special schools, it could be out of area. So it's really analysing the unit costs across the board of children with EHCPs to be sure spending money.
The point is that EHCPs can vary a lot between different children, even even in similar settings, and the numbers are not going to be so great as to provide statistical validity or make it problematic, I think. And anyway, I just wanted to know whether there was a needs weighting in that analysis.
Yes, there is a needs weighting in the analysis, but it is about making sure we're spending money in the right places. So, you know, it could be that our unit costs are too high in our independent non-maintained special schools, and we should be, through stronger commissioning activity, reducing that and redistributing that funding elsewhere.
Thank you. Chris.
Yeah, sorry to ask this question at 10 to 7. Just out of interest, the work that's been done on module 1 and 2, has that then informed the SEND strategy as well? And as a result of that, has anything changed within that strategy, or does the implementation plan just align with it?
It hasn't changed the SEND strategy.
Do you want to pick that? Shall I pick that up, Jane? So the SEND, as I said earlier, Chris, the SEND strategy wasn't agreed, wasn't signed off. The SEND strategy needs some more work, and it'll need to go back to the evidence that Newton have prepared on behalf of the DFE through the first 2 phases, and then we'll have to use that evidence to reshape the SEND strategy and obviously reshape a financial strategy through DBV. So the draft SEND strategy that we are holding on to is the work that was co-produced over the last 12 months, but the final strategy will have to link to the evidence that we've got from Newton and through the DBV programme and the financial recovery plan, if you like, for SEND.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Jackie.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Jane really if the number of learners that are EHCP learners that are in iCollege, whether that data is being considered in this plan, and whether you're looking at outcomes for learners.
Yeah, children in iCollege have certainly been considered, and in particular, the places that we've created specifically for children with EHCPs in iCollege, in the sense that those are getting good outcomes and are more cost effective than alternatives in the independent and non-maintained sector. So those have been considered by the consultants as a positive factor, and they've been factored into the costings in that way. In terms of outcomes, I think there's been some limitation in terms of the speed at which the exercise had to be done, but the case studies have certainly looked at outcomes. Those have been multi-agency case studies where we've looked at whether outcomes were ideal for children, and if not, why not? I suppose the why nots have been, you know, what have partly informed the outcome and the planned implementation plan.
So does that mean you've included the pod and the pod plus, but not EHCP learners across the rest of the service?
Those have been considered as well. So all of that data has been made available. Yes.
Thank you. Catherine. You're on mute, Catherine.
Sorry, I've had to move to my car because the school's closed and the Wi-Fi sort of gone down. I just wanted to say that I know we'll talk about this more at the meeting tomorrow, but there's some dispute over the unit costs and the data that's been represented. So I think that's something that we will need to come back and revisit in order to make sure that the information does reflect accurately the picture that we're being presented with, because otherwise I think it's going to be difficult to consider the delivering better value in its true form. But I know that's something that we'll submit a report for when requested following the meeting tomorrow, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to move on. I'm very aware we've only got 3 minutes left in the meeting. I've got a governors meeting that starts at 7. So if I could, so Avril, I do apologise that means that you're going to be slightly cut down. But if I can hand over to you at this point.
Yeah, I'm kind of assuming that people have had an opportunity to read this, and as it is for information only. But obviously there are some major changes to the childcare offer coming up, and it's from April next year. And over that period of time, I'm sure you've seen a lot of this in the press anyway. They're going to increase the offer to 2-year-olds and make it a universal offer to working parents. They're then going to increase the offer to all working parents that they've got a childcare provision from the age of 9 months. And they're also looking at wraparound care, which is aimed at primary age children in term time. So those are kind of the edited highlights. But there will be a lot more about it in the next report, because obviously we've now been allocated some funding around that. We've got some more information about our local rates, and we're going to have to weigh up how we pass that through to our providers in the normal way, but also in consideration of the deficit that we have in early years as well. So more to be seen in the early years report in January.
Thank you. So I think therefore we can probably have a discussion of that in our next meeting possibly. So in which case, can I hand over to Melanie for the deficit schools item?
Yeah, it doesn't really need a discussion considering the time. It's for information only. We've all seen the format before, and it just shows where we are with this year's deficits.
Lovely. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And if I can, for item 16, just ask people to note the forward plans and just ask if anyone's got any comments or questions about them. I think this is fairly standard. And then finally, just to declare that the date of the next meeting is the sort of extraordinary meeting, which my notes say Monday the 19th, but I think it's Tuesday the 19th of December. I think it's at 5 o'clock, and that will take place virtually. Okay. And at this point, I'll close the meeting. Just say thank you, everyone. It's been quite a long meeting. Can I ask everyone